Good morning. Let me start by apologizing for the delay. We've had some technical difficulties this morning. I'm Michael Friedman. I chair the Cognitive and Behavioral Health Advocacy Team for AARP Maryland. And AARP Maryland will be having shows from time to time about your mental well being. In these shows, we will be talking about some of the problems that take place in people's mental life, and we'll also be talking about some of what goes well for people. Both are really quite important, both to understand and to deal with the kinds of uh, problems of the mind that people have, but also to understand that people can and do age well psychologically, and we'll be talking about that as well. Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Kim Burton as our guest. Kim is an icon in Maryland in the field of mental health and aging. She started the Mental Health and Aging Coalition 20 years ago. And any place you go in this world, if you say Kim Burton, people know who you're talking about. So at this point, she is working for the Mental Health Association of Maryland. She provides education and training to Baltimore City organizations and others around the state. She is a highly desired speaker and presenter, terrific at what she does. Kim, thank you very much for joining us today. And obviously, you've devoted a substantial portion of your life to issues of mental health and aging, mental well-being and aging. I'm just curious why.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know many people who decided that they wanted to grow up to specialize in mental health and aging. But my interest grew out of working in nursing homes where I saw people who were definitely not receiving the help and the treatment that they needed to lead full lives. And I'm really driven now by the negative stereotypes and the stigma that exists around mental health that serves as a primary barrier to people getting the treatment that they need so that they can enjoy mental wellness and a good quality of life. Um, we need more education to support our mental wellness and to understand mental illness. And then we also have to combat negative societal attitudes about aging, including the fact that a lot of people think that depression and dementia are normal parts of aging, and they absolutely are not.
So could you say a little bit more about what you mean by stigma? People use the word all the time, and I think it's not necessarily clear what it means.
Yeah, for the purposes of what we're talking about here, stigma refers to the negative and discriminatory beliefs that exist around mental health. The majority of older adults that are with us today or that are in our communities were raised in an era when they didn't have the information that we have now about mental illness, right? So a lot of people are still operating under the false stereotypes where they believe that people with mental illness are really people who have deep character flaws or shortcomings. Stigma means that people are labeled deranged or crazy. These are all unhelpful kinds of thoughts and attitudes. And unfortunately, it leads to a lot of shame. And people then don't want to seek treatment. They stigmatize themselves. They stigmatize others. It's really problematic.
And some of that stigma is internalized as well, so that acknowledging that you have a mental problem is something that can be really difficult for people. You also mentioned the stereotypes, negative stereotypes about age, and you commented that everybody thinks that older adults are depressed and that that they're going to become demented in old age. Did you want to just add anything about that?
I first want to add that we're seeing this change, and I'm feeling grateful about that because we have people who are growing into older adulthood saying, "No, that's not me. I am healthy. I am well." But primarily, the messaging around aging is that it's a downhill experience. People assume that aging equates to decline, and this doesn't have to be the case. It's not the case for most people. Older adults as a whole express great satisfaction with their later years. But there are definitely challenges and risks that occur in later life.
So, can you say something about what those challenges are?
Yeah. So the challenges exist in, all kinds of realms, being physical, mental, emotional, social. But some examples would be common changes such as loss of vision or loss of hearing that then interferes with driving and socializing and engaging in things that people want to do. Other changes include the development of chronic illnesses or conditions, which are more common in later life, that then might lead to pain or lead to the use of medications that often have negative side effects. As we get older, we lose some stamina and physical strength. So that change might lead to limiting activities that people enjoy. It might even result in something like people having to move to a new home. So these changes compound, and we also need to understand and accept, as older people do, that they lose friends, they lose family members, they lose a little bit of generational identity. So these are some of the changes that I'm talking about that can present risk factors.
Well, you commented earlier that most people in old age actually find satisfaction in their
Mhm.
lives. So you've just gone through a significant list of what I refer to as developmental challenges. As you get old, things happen. I can vouch for that. I'm quite clear about it.
Right.
Uh,
And Michael, you're a great example of people that say, oh, well, here it comes, bring it on, and I'm resilient and I'll plow through and make great meaning out of their lives.
well, thank you for saying that. I do think that many people in old age, and most people, in fact, find satisfaction in their life. But I thought we should talk a bit about the kinds of problems that do happen, if not as frequently as some people think. They certainly are prevalent and very serious. So it seems to me that the condition that is most frightening to people is dementia. So I
Mhm.
was just wondering if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I would agree. I hear people all the time talking about fear of dementia. Ironically, that keeps a lot of people from looking into brain issues. So we do know a lot, but there's still more to be learned, and we're making discoveries about dementia all the time. But I want to start by clarifying the word dementia, the term dementia, because it's really a word that encompasses a set of symptoms. So dementia means that things are going on that reflect that the brain's not functioning the way that it should be. Dementia is not a standalone diagnosis. If somebody's experiencing dementia symptoms and a decline in brain function, something is causing that. And in some cases, the causes are things that can be reversed or treated. So examples would be medication and alcohol can both cause dementia symptoms, but if medication or alcohol is stopped, then those symptoms might clear. Another example that's pretty common, actually, hearing loss and social isolation contribute to dementia symptoms, but those are both issues that can be treated with hearing aids and persistence in staying socially connected. And we find then that dementia symptoms alleviate.
I find that really interesting. I think the sense in the world is that a diagnosis of dementia, of which Alzheimer's is the most common type, is virtually a death sentence. It means life as we know it is finished, and it's going to progress. I sometimes think it should be called regressed instead of progress, but that life is just going to get worse and worse.
Yeah, well, Michael, that's the kind of thing that makes people put their heads in the sand about this.
Right.
Because the truth is, fantastic things can happen in life while somebody is experiencing dementia. But there are illnesses that can make dementia permanent or progressive. And as you mentioned, Alzheimer's disease is the number one cause of that. But something like a stroke can also cause dementia symptoms. And we know that there's rehabilitation for stroke. So while we don't have for many illnesses that cause significant progressive dementia, while we don't have treatment yet, we have lots of interventions that people can use so that they can enjoy their life. It's not a death sentence.
So two important observations here. One is that sometimes dementia is caused by things that can be fixed, uh, or at least remediated, and even when it is Alzheimer's or another progressive disease, it extends over a period of time, and people have different experiences at different points
Mhm,
during that, and some of them can have considerable satisfaction. Some don't, but some can. Uh,
mhm.
I'd love to talk about this for a long time, but uh, we just have to keep moving here. So I thought we'd jump to the next thing that people expect of old age, and that's depression. And
Mm.
you've already commented that that's not so. That, but can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So we use this word depression a lot in our lexicon in the United States and elsewhere. But depression, as we talk about it in terms of mental health, we need to really differentiate feelings of sadness or grief that would be expected during tough times. Okay, we are all going to have these times when we are feeling depressed, but that's different from clinical depression or the disease of depression. Um, with the disease of depression, what we see are symptoms that are persistent. So, individuals who are feeling sad or grieving can still access joy in their life. People with depression aren't as quick to be able to access joy in their life. It is a result of um, dysfunctions or disruptions in what should be normal brain function, and it doesn't just impact mood. So, symptoms of depression are full body symptoms, and they include things like motivation and sleep and appetite and focus and behavior. So, depression's not just a mood. And as we get older, and this is super important to know, we tend to experience mental health problems in very physical ways. So it is more likely for an older adult to be experiencing pain with depression or fatigue that is really troubling and it disrupts their life. So unfortunately, people often dismiss these things as a normal part of aging or as something associated with a medical condition that they have or a medication.
So you would say it's normal to be sad from time to time.
Yes.
There's lots that goes on in life to make us sad, but that's different from, as you're saying, from clinical depression. And clinical depression is fairly, I don't want to say rare, but the vast majority of older adults at any point in time don't experience a clinical depression. Am I right about
Right.
that?
Yeah. So depression's a spectrum, and for each one of us, we really have to look at, am I functioning today as well as I have functioned in the past? Or are these symptoms interfering with life? And we don't want to be splitting hairs over this and really getting into gradients. The issue is when you're not yourself, look into it because
Yeah.
depression can really creep up on you.
So in addition to a depression, and in fact, it's as a clinical entity more prevalent than depression. Anxiety disorders
Hmm.
are a significant uh,
Hmm.
problem for many older adults. Can you comment some on that?
Sure. Anxiety, also a very common word that we use all the time, and an experience that is normal to being human, right? So anxiety motivates us to do things. But when we have symptoms of anxiety that are interfering with our ability to do the things we would normally do, or to be the people that we normally are, something's going on. Anxiety disorders like depression are an illness. Something's happening in the brain. Things are out of whack, and the symptoms are physical and mental and disruptive to daily life. Somebody who is in their 70s or 80s and just worried to death that their grandchild in Minnesota doesn't have a warm enough coat, but they weren't like that before, it lends itself to that whole stereotype that we have that older people worry all the time. Well, if you didn't worry when you were 50, 60, 70, and now you're in your 80s and you're worried all the time, something's going on. And unfortunately, we contribute that to normal aging, and it's really something that can be treated. So, yeah.
So one of the things that I think is the case is that many people who are sad or depressed, frightened or have an anxiety disorder, is that they turn to alcohol particularly
Mm.
to try to feel better. And we often don't talk about the misuse of alcohol by older adults. And of course, there are other substances as well. I know this is something you know a great deal about, so
Yeah,
maybe you can.
thanks for the platform here, Michael. It is a passion that I have, because humans are designed to get themselves out of any kind of pain. So we're often reaching for things that make us feel better. I saw your coffee cup earlier. You know, we use coffee to help wake us up. We use sugar to help pump us up. And a lot of people use alcohol. It is a socially acceptable drug, but the problem is that it is a drug. And so drugs like alcohol, drugs like medication, drugs even like marijuana, while people can use them safely, the issue is that as we get older, our metabolism changes, and those changes make us very vulnerable to the negative effects of using these different substances, and also to addiction. So I don't think enough people understand that at any age you can develop addiction, and that when you're older and you have these metabolic vulnerabilities, you actually are, you can more easily become addicted to different kinds of substances. And not only substances, things that make you feel better. So we see older adults developing addictions to gambling and shopping when those aren't problems that they had in earlier life. Thanks for bringing that up. We need more education on this particular subject.
Well, I happen to agree with you on that. I think that one of the most neglected areas related to mental well-being does have to do with the misuse of substances and the development of other addictions, such as gambling. So I root you on, Kim. This is really important, and
Michael,
I
let me just,
agree
the
with you.
semantics are really important. So somebody who's always had 3 glasses of wine on a Friday night, they may not see that as misuse, because they don't understand that 3 glasses of wine when you're 80 is equivalent to what would have been 6 glasses of wine in younger years. So people don't see it as misuse. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to keep driving, when we're educating people.
Very important. And I think that there are misimpressions because when people think about substance abuse, they tend to think about people with serious alcoholism, but
Mhm.
also street addicts, if I can use that terminology. And you know, there's very little abuse of heroin and cocaine among older people, but a lot of overuse of alcohol and prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs as well. I'd
Mhm.
love to, if we had more time to talk about this, but I do want to start to welcome some questions. But just before I do that, We're talking about some of the things that can go wrong in the mental life of older adults, but there's a lot that goes right as well. You said something earlier about resilience and adaptation, and maybe you can just say something further about achieving psychological well-being when you're old.
Mhm. They used to say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and we know that that's wrong. One of the things we've learned about the brain is that it has plasticity, meaning it can change. That means we can learn new things. Some people are resilient by nature, and some aren't. Resiliency and problem solving and positive coping skills are all things that we can learn, but we need to be open to hearing that we need to adapt these kinds of new practices. Sometimes we just get really tight with the stress that's going through life. So I want to say develop these positive coping skills and resiliency, because as we get older, we are going to hit bumps. We just are. We don't know what they are. So let's be prepared for that. Number two, let's make sure that we keep engaged with those things that bring meaning to our life and those people that are supportive to us. So these are things we can do to protect mental health. The other thing is that mental health and physical health, they go together. So that means that people need to be on top of their health care. They need to be getting regular checkups. They also need to be doing everything that they can to take care of any chronic health conditions that they have. There are a couple of resources I want to mention. One is actually the AARP Staying Healthy. It is an initiative to promote brain health. So staying sharp, there you go. You can see it at the bottom of the screen. And if you go to that website, you can find all kinds of things that you can do. I don't think that people realize the power we have over our brain health. And that's a really good resource to find that.
And we have to mention before we leave the guidebook that you've written to mental health in Maryland. Uh, and here's a telephone number to call, and there's a website as well for
Mhm.
that. We have a whole bunch of questions
Great.
here, and we have a very short time left to try to deal with them. One person had already asked, "What can you do to enhance resilience with age?" So I hope that you've pointed out that there are things that can be done, and uh, uh, where to get help building resilience. Is there some place or telephone number or
Yeah, I
your
wish. Don't I wish?
guidebook?
Or a pill or a magic wand?
Yes, that would be
Uh,
good.
it's an exercise. It is something, and you can look into senior centers, because senior centers have lots of activities around development of these kinds of things.
Okay.
But you would be surprised how much is online about developing resiliency.
So there are so many good questions here. I don't know which one to take. I'm just going to take them in the order that I got them. What's being done to address the reimbursement barriers? So I
Um,
guess we should say first there are reimbursement barriers. Your advice is if you
my
recognize
advice
some serious
actually,
changes, get help, but can you get it?
yeah, getting help can be challenging. This is kind of, I'm afraid of going down a big rabbit hole with this, but I would recommend being in touch with AARP's public policy work to find out what they are doing, because I'm quite confident that they are working on reimbursement issues. It is an effort that needs to be done collectively, less so individually.
So there certainly is some work going on this. AARP is pushing hard on the costs of drugs.
Mhm.
That's a big item on the agenda, and we're working along with the Mental Health and Aging Coalition, which you founded, to work on issues to make sure that there is enough funding available to get services developed. And we're all pushing for the state to develop a plan to close the gaps. because there are huge gaps.
I want to go back on something I said, which is that you can't do something individually. You can. You need to be an advocate for yourself and push that the health of your brain is just as vital and as the health of your heart and your lungs and your kidney and your liver. So be an advocate.
Again, we have wonderful questions here. Can hormonal changes that come with age have a negative impact on your emotional well-being?
Oh, yes. Oh, what a great question. Yes, I myself took myself to a couple of neurologists wondering about my brain function when in fact it was all hormonal. So that's a really good question. And it affects both men and women, but women in particular, during changes in their life, hormones can really do a number on brain function.
And women can get help with that.
Yes, but this is something that they need to work really carefully with their doctors on.
Very good. And let's see. How is anxiety different from depression? Someone asks.
Ooh, they have a lot of similarities in their symptomology. But I think the best way I could say that it differs is depression. People are usually feeling really tired, hopeless, a little bit helpless. They usually feel some guilt and that there's not really a reason for them to be around. It's kind of a sense of giving up on life, whereas anxiety is more of a sense of distress where people are feeling concerned or worried. They may not know why. They may realize that everything's okay around them, but inside they do not feel okay. Both of them can share problems with digestion, problems with pain, and definitely problems with focus. So that's another thing I'm glad to be able to respond to with this question is that depression and anxiety can mess with brain function such that you feel like you have dementia or you have dementia symptoms. It's hard to pay attention to things. It's hard to remember things. Your thinking can get really foggy. And we often see when people are properly treated for depression and anxiety, their cognition improves.
Let me just jump to a difficult issue to talk about. There's a question here. How likely is it that depressed older adults will harm themselves? How can this be treated? And of course,
Yeah,
suicide rates among older adults are quite high.
quite high. That is a group of people with among the highest rates of suicide of any population, but we don't hear that discussed very much. And when you look at public health messages targeting suicide, they're usually addressing it to younger people, when in fact older adults have very high rates of suicide. But that individual put in the word self-harm, which I think is really important too. Suicide is one thing, but self-harm is another, which is a way that people might express distress that they're feeling inside. And self-harm can be physical, but it can also be people putting themselves in danger, not taking care of themselves. There's something called passive suicide where people may decide they don't want to be here anymore. So they stop taking necessary medication or they stop eating. Those are forms of self-harm that can actually lead to suicide.
So I'm just going to throw in on this. I just did the numbers on suicide in Maryland through the CDC website. There were 657 suicides in Maryland in 2019, the last year we have total data for. That's more than the number of homicides, just to give some sense of how significant the problem of suicide is. In addition, it is considerably higher as a rate among older adults than among younger people. It is a significant problem that often is neglected. We are basically out of time, which is too
Mm.
bad because I would love to keep talking with you, Kim, but we can do that offline. But I think this has been a valuable conversation. I hope that the people who are listening have found it a valuable conversation. I'm very grateful
Mm.
for your taking the time to do this. I hope that they're now going to put up on the screen some telephone numbers that people can call. There it is. And you can find this information, I believe, on the AARP website as well.
Michael, I want to thank you and AARP for prioritizing mental wellness. Really important, and I thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, it's great talking to you. We've covered a lot of territory. There's much more to talk about, so let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Take care.
You too.